Mike Flanagan's name is known far and wide in the horror world. From his television shows to his movies, there is no one more at the top of their game than Flanagan. So it's interesting to know that he and his writing partner were approached about remaking a certain post-Scream slasher film. But what they did was completely unexpected. Join us today for what the f*** happened to this unmade horror movie as we cover Mike Flanagan's I Know What You Did Last Summer.
What's your favorite scary movie?
Scream completely changed the slasher game when it released in 1996. Its writer, Kevin Williamson, was seen as the It Kid, and some of his past projects were rushed into production, including his adaptation of Lois Duncan's 1973 novel. Well, I mean, kinda. Adaptation is a loose word. He took the basic concept from her book of a tragedy haunting someone 1 year later and turned it into a full-blown slasher movie. What was to follow was considerably less impactful than its counterpart Scream, but it was successful enough to warrant a very rushed sequel just 1 year later. Jesus, 1 year? And while there are certainly fans of both of these movies, they weren't exactly anything special. The series dropped off, eventually releasing a straight-to-DVD sequel titled I'll Always Know What You Did Last Summer in 2006. It featured no characters from the first two films, outside of the killer, and the production was considerably schlocky. Because of this, the series sat and languished for many years. There had been rumors of different sequels and even a remake or two. As is often the case in the horror world, wherever success was had, producers circled like vultures, trying to revive what was once dead. Mike Flanagan and his writing partner, Jeffrey Howard, were fresh off the success of their film Oculus, starring Karen Gillan. This was right in the midst of the reboot era. Wait, are we still in that era? Either way, reboots were hot in Hollywood. Flanagan and Howard were approached about remaking the 1997 Whodunit from Kevin Williamson, and they almost immediately, enthusiastically even, turned it down. Huh? What?
What are you waiting for, huh?
But the duo just wasn't interested in telling a story that everyone already knew the ending to. The hook-handed fisherman was a cool enough character, but his identity was already known and the twist well established. It had been parodied time and time again over the years. So no matter how many times they were asked, they just kept refusing. Until they met with Neil Moritz's production company, who held the rights to the film, and they were told they could do whatever they wanted, so long as they kept the whodunit nature. And just like that, the duo were intrigued enough to come up with a pitch. Howard has said he had no idea that the Lois Duncan novel even existed before they started outlining their project. However, he did read it in order to see if there was anything worth using or paying homage to. And while Duncan was very, very excited when it was announced that Flanagan was working on a reboot, she probably would have been very disappointed to see the slasher route they decided to take it. Because while Flanagan and Howard's version certainly feels unique, it definitely pays more homage to the 97 film than the 73 novel. The duo are horror fans after all. The hook-handed fisherman's jacket wearing killer is still included here, though their identity isn't the same. And it does still follow the Agatha Christie style dwindling of characters. The story centers around a group of friends on vacation right before they all go their separate ways at university. So, just like the original movie, they're partying it up and eventually someone gets murdered, but there's no hiding of any dead body going on here. Instead, the missing person is never actually found and just presumed dead. But our lead, Matt, is blamed for the disappearance. Matt is blamed for this girl's death and even goes on trial for it, but is thankfully acquitted. Unfortunately, that only really works in the eyes of the court, not the public, who still hound him like he's an actual murderer. There's even a podcast about the criminal case called I Know What You Did Last Summer. So, I mean, clearly Flanagan and Howard are having fun with the screenplay. One of the more interesting concepts at play here would have been the narrator. With the whodunit nature of the story, they were wanting to focus on shifting narratives, and a narrator who didn't know what was actually happening. While often narrators in these stories can be quite ominous and foretelling, the script had this narrator much more unsure of events, which added more to the mystery. You never quite know if what the narrator is telling you is actually the truth or not, or just what they think is the truth. Another huge standout is one of the fisherman's kills, which would have involved him pinning someone to the ground with solar lights. He'd stake them down one by one before finally going in for the final strike. Through the different iterations of the script, this sequence remained, and it would have definitely been a standout. There are admittedly some things that I'm not sure would work. It's been pretty well established that you need a female at the lead of your slasher movie. Otherwise, the story can come across as kind of, well, gay. And I'm not just saying that. There have literally been documentaries about this. Go check out Scream Queen, by the way. So the male lead definitely has an upward hill to climb, but it already does establish it as a little different from the other films. And long before the Halloween 2018 trend of bringing back legacy characters for a requel became so much of the norm, there were intentions to bring back Jennifer Love Hewitt's Julie for a brief role. See, you know that podcast that I mentioned earlier that follows the crime intently? Well, that's Julie, and she becomes even more involved once the fisherman starts attacking people. She would even have this extended run-in with the slicker-wearing psychopath. Another standout sequence. As much as I wish I could go over the twist, that just isn't my place here. There were many different versions of the ending, some darker than others, but ultimately neither of the writers has really let slip what their desired intentions ended up being for the third act. Unfortunately, for those interested in seeing this film come to fruition, Flanagan and Howard just stopped hearing from the production company. Anytime they were asked about it in interviews, they seemed just as interested in the news of its development. Given the success they'd had at the time, it's very strange that the production company wasn't gung-ho about moving this along. Howard had this to say about the scrapped project. It's hard to understand why some things get made and some things don't sometimes. This thing was kind of easy to understand. Nobody was wrong in this situation in my mind. Once it became clear that the ending was going to have to be softened, I think the interest in making the movie softened in tandem. So the project just went away. There was recently a TV show on Amazon Prime that tried to claim it'd be more like Duncan's novel, but it was still pretty slashery. They played very loose with the original concept and proved that it just isn't what audiences were after, getting canceled after only one season. I would say that they deserve more of a chance, but any show that randomly adds a cult element gets docked for lazy writing. And its cancellation likely means a lack of interest in the property any time in the foreseeable future. Which is unfortunate, because the concept has always been a fun one that really lent itself to the horror. Flanagan and Howard have remained very busy in recent years, releasing The Haunting of Hill House and Midnight Mass for Netflix. And it seems like everything Flanagan touches turns to gold. Even the Shining sequel movie Dr. Sleep both creates its own identity while still paying tribute to what Kubrick and King did before it. His command over the genre has been one of the most impressive things to watch over the last decade. Needless to say, I'm a big Flanagan fan. With this continued dominance, I can't see Mike Flanagan returning to an I Know What You Did Last Summer remake. From a guy that seems so passionate about so many different things, it seems so clear that this one just isn't his priority. What does seem possible is that this script gets reworked into an original piece. Given how little connection there is to the original film or novel, this would probably be the easiest way to breathe new life into the story. Whether that ever happens remains to be seen. But whatever Flanagan's next move is, I'm sure you'll hear it from JoBlo first. Are there any unmade horror movies that you want us to talk about? Comment on them below, and we'll see you in the next episode. Usually on this show, we like to take a look at the films that have never quite entered production. But this time around, we're taking a look at a film that was altered in so many different ways that by the time it came out, it was but a shell of its original idea. Today on What the F Happened to This Unmade Horror Movie, we're taking a look at a version we never got of Scream 3.
What's your favorite scary movie?
When Scream came out in 1996, it completely took the horror world by storm. Directed by Wes Craven and written by Kevin Williamson, the horror genre would be forever changed due to the meta-influence of this one film. They would team up again on Scream 2, which served as a meta look at sequels that also managed to light the box office on fire. All signs pointed to a third film. However, due to Williamson's other successes with I Know What You Did Last Summer, The Faculty, and the TV show Dawson's Creek, he was unavailable to return for writing duties. However, he had provided notes for what Scream 3 could be, and boy is it interesting. When Williamson first sold the script for Scream back in 1995, he wanted to sweeten the deal for interested studios. So he also included a 5-page outline for 2 sequels. While Williamson was able to execute much of what he planned for Scream 2, he still had to make a change in Killer after an early script leak. Scream 3, on the other hand, had a much messier journey to screen. I want to thank you guys for watching What the F Happened to This Unmade Horror Movie, and ask that if you enjoy our shows, please subscribe to our channel right now, like this video, and click on the bell so you can be notified each time a new video goes up. And now, back to the show. Williamson expanded his original outline into a 20 to 30 page detailed outline that had the film taking place in Woodsboro, where a third Stabbed movie was being filmed. People would then start getting murdered in an effort to lure Sidney out of hiding. So while the change in locations was pretty major, the general idea of the outline remained in the final movie. One element that did not was the killer. In the film that was actually released, the killer is revealed to be Roman Bridger, the long-lost half-brother of Sidney Prescott. He had tormented Sidney as revenge against Maureen, who had turned him away and rejected him. It's very convoluted and is often heralded as the weakest killer reveal of the series. And it's hard to argue. Funnily enough, Williamson had a familiar face as the mastermind behind all of Sidney's misfortunes. Stu Macher. See, Stu had survived the television electrocution from the first film and was in prison all of this time. He had been masterminding all of Sidney's misfortunes.
It's always been me, the author of all your pain.
Some of this may sound familiar for what happened in the final film. Matthew Lillard had been hired to return, even being paid for the gig. However, once a new writer was brought in, the Stu character was left firmly in the past. While Craven wanted Williamson to return, Kevin just didn't have the time, and Bob Weinstein was unwilling to wait for him to become available. Lead Neve Campbell wasn't contracted for a third film, and had been very busy with her TV show Party of Five and films like Drowning Mona, so if they wanted her back, they had to work within her schedule, which meant they only had her filming for 3 weeks. This required a massive story overhaul. So writer Aaron Kruger was brought on for scripting duties, with the caveat being that he write it quickly. 6 weeks, in fact. Such an extreme deadline for a film series that is known for its great writing should have been a red flag from the beginning. But the Weinsteins really liked Kruger's tenacity and quick turnaround, and didn't see any issue with the limited time. Craven was even impressed with the pages that he had been receiving from Aaron during this time. By his own admission, Kruger had issues with writing for the characters, often having to revise drafts with Craven or the actors. Unfortunately, once filming started, Kruger was taken off the project by Weinstein in order to work on Reindeer Games. Leda IKWYDLS, I really don't even know if I'm saying that name right, was then brought in for any rewrites needed while filming. This is odd because while Leda went on to write films such as Shutter Island and Avatar, she had no experience at the time. But Wes Craven felt that she had an understanding of the first two Scream films that would make her perfect for the job. Her main focus was the inclusion of Sidney's mother and bringing the events of the first film back around to this one. And then the events of April 20th, 1999 changed everything. When the Columbine high school shootings happened, society was looking for something to blame. Not wanting to face reality, people came together to blame the media. It was apparently the fault of violent movies and video games. You know, the exact argument that Billy and Stu used in the first film. Absolute nonsense.
Don't you blame the movies! Movies don't create psychos! Movies make psychos more creative!
Unfortunately, Miramax caved to the mounting pressure and had many demands for Wes Craven. The first of which being the change in location from Woodsboro to Los Angeles. They felt the move would help get ahead of any criticism of a small town being devastated by tragedy, like in Columbine. And with the plot being based around making a movie, the change to Los Angeles made the most sense. They also didn't want any teenagers involved in the killings, for obvious reasons. The final caveat was a big one though. They wanted Craven to focus on the comedic moments and to lighten up on the bloodshed. Oh boy. While Craven fought back, it clearly wasn't enough, because the film we got had more than its fair share of comedic bits, and the kills are mostly a result of unseen stabs and then people covered in blood. Even the big house explosion quickly envelops the character in flame, and we don't see any actual gore. When compared to the rather visceral shots from the first two films, Scream 3 really disappoints. The biggest change that occurred during production were the number of killers. Both of the prior Scream films had two different killers, Billy and Stu in the first, and Mrs. Loomis and Mickey from the second. The third film changed things up, and only Roman was revealed to be the killer. However, that wasn't the original intention, and the evidence is all over the film. Sure, they tease several times that the police detectives are up to no good, even giving Roman a police-issued bulletproof vest, and there have even been theories regarding David Arquette's Dewey. But the main character to look at here is Emily Mortimer's Angelina. She would have been Roman's lover and also a former classmate of Sidney's. Unlike Roman, whose motivation was payback for the childhood taken away from him by Sidney's mother, Angelina's motivations are fame. She idolizes Sidney and knows that playing her will be her ticket to superstardom. But with the prevailing worry about people guessing the ending and wanting to come up with something fresh, they decided to whittle it down to just one killer and drop the Angelina-Roman team up. But this change happened fairly late in the process, and its footprints are all over the film. Ghostface is able to be in way too many places at once, and travels massive distances in short amounts of time. Emily is also unaccounted for in many moments where Ghostface is present. So in trying to make the film more unique and distinct from the prior films, they also made it nonsensical, which is very anti-Scream. While we've talked about plenty of the changes with the ending, one of the other main changes would have been the opening. While the released film saw Cotton Weary getting murdered at his home in LA, Williamson's outline had Sidney opening the film with a friend. They would be stalked and nearly killed, only for Sidney to kill Ghostface and reveal that it was simply a fan. This sets up why Sidney is off hiding in the woods. But obviously, given that Neve Campbell was only available for 3 weeks, her scenes were given to others. While most of the casting remained consistent despite script changes, Kate Hudson was announced for a role, speculated to be Sarah Darling, but she dropped out before filming started, likely due to the massive success of a certain other film released at the same time. But with all of these changes, I find the biggest issue with Scream 3 to be with its characters. These don't feel like the people we followed around in the first two films. Sure, they may sound like them, but they're missing those key elements that make them more than just Neve Campbell, Courtney Cox, and David Arquette. Kruger himself admits to not quite getting the characters as a result of him not being involved from the beginning. An early draft even had Sidney as more of a Linda Hamilton in Terminator 2 kind of character. Thankfully, Wes stepped in and put a kibosh on that. Who knows what we would have gotten otherwise. But as is, there's something that feels quite off about the main trio's interactions. Had we gotten Williamson's version of Scream 3, it seems likely that much of the criticism would be remedied. The new LA location would revert back to the familiar scenery of Woodsboro, and rather than opening with a side character, Cotton Weary, we get Sidney and a logical explanation for why she'd be in the middle of the woods. And while we'd get a mastermind behind it all, the reveal would be someone we care about and know, rather than a brand new character that has all of this expository connection to our lead.
She slammed the door in my face, and she said I was Rena's child and Rena was dead.
Unlike Aaron Kruger, who was desperate to avoid retreading the prior films, Williamson's goal always seemed to be about making logical sense for the story. And without his involvement, we received the messy version that released to theaters on February 4th, 2000. Given all of these inconsistencies and studio demands, it's no surprise that the film received mixed reviews. Fans weren't given the sequel they were promised, and all interest in the Scream franchise seemed to wither up overnight. Thankfully, after years of crappy imitators, Craven and Williamson were able to join forces again for Scream 4. This time, there were no cultural events that caused a massive shift in the story. Thank God.
What's your favorite scary movie?
Today, for the horror movie that almost was, we're trying to get into the holiday spirit. And what says Christmas cheer more than a small furry creature that you can't feed after midnight? Or keep in bright light? Or get wet? Or, well, I guess those are all the rules. You know what we're talking about. Today is all about Gremlins 3. When it comes to Christmas time, there are only a few films horror fans have to get them in the scary holiday spirit. Whether that's Bob Clark's Black Christmas, Silent Night, Deadly Night, or even a more recent feature in Krampus, the options are quite limited. Yet one film that propels itself to the forefront is Joe Dante's Gremlins. Something about this film manages to be scary,
They hatched. Get out of the house.
fun, and yes, even Christmassy.
Sit by the fireplace and open your Christmas presents, okay? Attaboy.
But let's back up for those that need a crash course on the Mogwai. In the first Gremlins, we follow Billy Peltzer, played by Zach Galligan, as he tries to help support his family, keep his dog out of trouble, get promoted at his terrible job, and get a date with the girl of his dreams.
I'd love to.
He's a great guy that you're rooting for throughout, despite the fact that he can't seem to follow instructions.
Number one, he hates bright lights. Sunlight will kill him. Number two, keep him away from water. And probably the most important thing, don't ever feed him after midnight.
Really, if you have a rule, Billy isn't going to follow it. Its sequel, Gremlins 2: A New Batch, takes that holiday cheer and replaces it with a more meta look at the television industry, foregoing the Christmas element. That's right, we get to watch Billy during his job at a TV studio, because that's why we cared so much about the first film, Billy's journey towards a promotion. Right. While not the runaway success that the first film was, audiences were still left wanting more, so they waited for a sequel, and waited some more. Rumors sprung up over the years to varying degrees of truth. It always seemed like movie studios just never understood what to do with the franchise, especially given the true stars of the film, the puppets. That's right, the main attraction of the series were always the Gremlins themselves.
I'll bet every kid in America would like to have one of these. They might even replace the dog as the family pet.
In particular, the Mogwai known as Gizmo. The practical effects work in both films managed to impress like no other. These effects are a major reason as to why these films feel timeless, and is often at the top of the wish list when it comes to getting another sequel. Even this fan film from 2008 knew what their bread and butter would be, and painstakingly recreated these puppets in order to avoid CGI. The video was practically a demo reel for the young filmmaker, clearly wanting a creative role in the third film. Inserting the Gremlins into classic movies was exciting, and it seemed like a sequel would be made any day now, except it never gained enough momentum to manifest into an actual feature film. The interest was clearly there, but it was left, relegated to rumor for years. Original star Zach Galligan has always been very vocal about his love for the Gremlins franchise and his desire to return to the role of Billy. He's even started several Twitter campaigns to try and show just how much interest there is from the general public for more Gremlins content. Finally, it was revealed that the film's original writer, Christopher Columbus, was working with Carl Ellsworth on Gremlins 3, and it would see Galligan returning. Not only that, but it was also promised to feature practical puppets, not CGI. There were even rumors that there was a part for Phoebe Cates to return as Billy's love interest, as stated by Ellsworth. There was, I believe, a smaller role for Billy's girlfriend, but Gizmo was at the very core of the story. It explored more of the mythology and the history of the Gremlins. Making sure the story revolved around Gizmo seemed to be the right call, no matter what other characters surrounded him. He's always been the standout of the series, and he's beloved in any capacity. Finding more about the history of the Gremlins seemed like a logical next step, and one we'll discuss in a little bit. The script for Gremlins 3 is even said to feature the moral conundrum of whether or not to kill Gizmo in order to stop all the madness. It's an interesting concept and one that fans have debated for years. So it'd be fascinating to see this kind of question posed to the film's characters. But would they actually go through with it? Or just have it mentioned as an idea? Either way, it's a story element that would be intriguing for a third film. But then, out of nowhere, Gremlins 3 turned into a reboot. That's right. The thing that we were promised the film would never be became exactly that. But apparently Christopher Columbus had different ideas and wanted to retool the franchise, without the need to carry past characters over into the new film. This isn't a huge surprise, because despite Galligan stating that the proposed sequel would honor both Gremlins films that came before, Columbus has always been very vocal about his dislike for the second film. The fans, however, have really latched on to the wacky sequel, so ignoring it would really alienate the same people they wanted to pack the theaters with. By rebooting the series, he was able to forego that problem entirely. Thankfully, the movie stalled again, and talks of the reboot seemed to stall completely. One of the biggest factors getting in the way of a third Gremlins film seemed to always be one of rights issues. Both Christopher Columbus and original star Zach Galligan have mentioned issues with the rights, and given that Warner Brothers obtained the license in 2019, the issue appears to stem from Warner. Seeing as how they are producing their own prequel show for HBO Max entitled Secrets of the Mogwai, it could simply be a case of not wanting to overlap properties that are tonally opposite. So at this point, we may just have to play the waiting game. Don't fret though, just because we're getting Gremlins in a different form doesn't mean Gremlins 3 is completely dead. In fact, we recently caught word from the film's original writer, Christopher Columbus, about his version for Gremlins 3, and not only that, he actually has it all written and everything. He has said that this would return to the macabre tone of the original. He originally worked with Ellsworth on Gremlins 3, but it's unknown if Columbus's new version is the Ellsworth version or not, though that likely seems to be the case. Regardless of what happens, the new HBO Max show is a step in the right direction. The show will be going over the complete history of the Mogwai, and how these creatures came to be. That means a potential Gremlins 3 wouldn't have to address the history and can get right to giving us what we want. Gizmo and Billy trying to prevent some kind of catastrophe. Because really, that's the main event. There's still certainly reason to be skeptical though. We've seen many different series come back from an extended amount of time off to limited success. And as much as Columbus wants to take credit for the original film's success, much of that success would be contributed to the film's director, Joe Dante, as well as its producer, Steven Spielberg, who were both very creatively hands-on for the first film. In 2017, Joe Dante said he'd love to make Gremlins 3, even stated that he wanted it to be rated R. But as of this moment, he's unfortunately not involved. And without either of these two creative minds being involved, it can't automatically be assumed that Columbus's involvement will be enough to make up for the lack of Dante and Spielberg. I know that whatever happens, I'll be holding out hope for another entry in the series, because it's been too long since we've had these creatures wreaking havoc on screen. And that's something every generation needs to experience, I mean, how else are they supposed to know about proper Mogwai care?